Alright everyone, welcome back. Kult of Athena here for Kult of Athena. Today we're looking at an interview with this guy, Ryan Whitlinger. So Ryan is going to give us a little bit of preface into how he got started with Kult of Athena and also into some sword collecting as we go through this interview series. Let's get to it. Thanks for joining me.
All right.
Yeah, I feel this is gonna be good to see you too. This is gonna be weird because this same room is where I got hired. Like what was it, like 4.5 years ago?
Yeah.
We're technically in the break room right now.
Yeah.
So we just kind of set this up and everything. So first question, how did you get into just swords and everything like that? Swords and armor, even previously before starting the business at Kult of Athena?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, like your general interest of swords and armor and history and all that. How did that start?
All right. Well, yeah, it started as long as I can remember, to be honest. When I was a very small child, I just always was fascinated with swords and armor and all the sword and sorcery movies that were out there. You know, I was a big fan of things like the 80s movies like Excalibur and Conan and the Sword and the Sorcerer, all that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a kid, we'd stay up like all night watching these things on like Showtime or something when we were kids. It was a lifelong fascination. I don't know when it started. I feel like I was maybe born with this because as soon as I started seeing these movies, something resonated in me, and I was just like, yes, this is what I want. I want this life.
Yes.
It was crazy. So, you know, as a kid, I'd have toy swords and, you know, organize medieval battles in the backyard, you know, with all the kids and you know, all that kind of stuff. So it was just a lifelong type of interest that I had. Over time, you know, I grew up, got into an actual career. You know, I was doing web design for another company, and you know, the love of swords kind of went to the back burner because at the time that I was kind of growing up and getting into the point where I actually had money where I could buy something.
Yeah.
You know, there wasn't a whole lot of affordable swords in the market. Like when we're talking like the early 90s, you know, or early to mid 90s, like after I got out of high school and had a job and had a little bit of disposable income. At that point, there was very few things on the market. There was very high-end custom stuff, and then there was rather expensive decorative items. You know, Marto was big back then.
Okay.
And those types of brands.
We don't carry that anymore, do we?
No, we don't. We don't really.
I've never heard that company before. That's why.
We have some here and there.
Okay.
But typically, it's not big in the market like it was many years ago. You know, they tend more towards the fantasy type products, which is not really what we kind of focus in. We try to stay a little bit more on the historic line of things.
Right.
So at that time there wasn't a whole lot available, so I didn't start a sword collection immediately. You know, as time went on, I did start picking up a few things. There were some nice decorative things that were on the lower cost range that I was able to locate through looking around. But ultimately I was kind of dissatisfied with the selection that was available. What could be had out there wasn't a whole lot, so one thing kind of led to another. While I was doing web design for this other company, they actually were mailed a catalog from a small sword supplier, and they had nothing to do with the sword space. They actually sold model trains. You know,
what?
Yeah, European model trains.
But they had swords too?
No, they didn't, but because they were on like a wholesale mailing list.
Oh, okay.
Somebody had sent them a catalog. They're like, hey, we got these couple of swords that we sell in here, and they came to me one day and they're like, hey, you're into swords and history and stuff. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, here, maybe you'd like this. So I was checking it out and I'm like looking at it and I'm like, well, you know, some of these are decently priced. It was all really decorative stuff back then.
This was in the 90s, you said?
Yeah, by this point it was the late 90s.
Late 90s, okay.
Probably around 98 or so.
Okay.
And I was looking at it and it was some interesting stuff, you know, but lower end decorative type items, you know. But it was cool. So with that kind of thing, that's when I kind of started my collection a little bit. You know, it was like, oh, I could get some decent looking stuff to hang on the wall for fairly cheap. But extrapolating out from that, I just kind of thought, you know, this is good prices. I can get a wholesale account.
Right.
I can start a business doing this. I was already technically a business because I owned the corporation that did the web design.
Okay, so you're already familiar with that side of the business.
Right, I was
the
ready.
back end of it
Right, I was already running a business for maybe about 3-4 years already.
Okay.
You know, as just a web design consultant.
Okay.
You know, so at that point I was like, I could probably make a quick website and sell some of these things. And that's exactly what I did. So that's when Kult of Athena was started. I think it was 99. I think, well, we started doing some things in 99. I think 2000 is when the actual domain name went online.
Yeah.
And you know, we opened up as an actual website in 2000. So we started, I think I had like maybe about 12 items on the website in 2000.
So it was just one page then?
Yeah, it was basically one page. It was just thrown together. It wasn't very advanced. It was just enough to get some products up there with a simple shopping cart and see what happened, you know, and it started going, surprisingly, you know, one order here, one order there, a couple of things, and you know, I just took basically the website, the entire business was started on about a $200 investment, to be honest. I mean, I took about $200 and I was like, I'll buy some swords,
Yeah.
you know, at the wholesale, and then we'll start selling those. And you know, I just took the profits from that, and then the next order? All right, now $250 worth of swords. You know?
Just stacked it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I was running it out of my house at the time. You know, I had a spare bedroom that started getting filled up with swords,
Yeah.
little by little. You know, but fairly early, I actually did start importing stuff directly.
Okay.
You know, because it became apparent to me rather quickly that I would hit the limit and the top of what was available to sell, right?
Right.
Because I'd tap out what was available from that supplier pretty quickly. They only had so many items that interested me. You know, most of the stuff that they would be selling and most of the stuff that was on the market, it was lots of pocket knives and things like that. And I'm like, well, that's not really where I'm focusing.
Right.
So I'd be taking the small handful of swords that they would have available through their importing sources and carrying those. And pretty early on, probably within a couple of years of being in business, I started getting connections with some of the overseas manufacturers and putting into production some of the things that they could make there, importing them directly, actually coming up with some designs on my own, giving it to those factories to have them start doing it. At this time, it was still mostly just going to be decorative items.
Okay.
Early on like that, but we started expanding the product offering lines.
So would you say that the when you started like sourcing from different companies and all that, like the fantasy items that was it like fantasy items you were buying, or like more like functional stuff?
Yeah,
like
it was
getting on the lines of it though.
Yeah, it was a lot. I was always more interested in the historic things, right?
Okay.
Like I'd always take like a simple Viking sword over some goblin weapon with skulls all over it or something. You know? I mean, there's a place for that stuff, and some of that stuff can be really cool, but it doesn't resonate with me as much. So I was always looking for more historic pieces. So we tended towards some of that like generic fantasy stuff, you know, like kind of like plausible fantasy, where this specific sword or dagger, it's not something that existed in history, but it looks like it could have.
Right.
You know, that kind of stuff. We did a lot of that for a while, and just kind of started expanding from there.
Okay.
You know, so that was kind of stage one. You know,
Right.
whatever type of cool items we could get from existing supply chains, or starting other new supply chains from some direct factories and putting some new products into production. That's where it started. So after a few years of that, then I was able to start reaching out to some of the larger, more functional suppliers, you know.
Right.
Starting to carry things like Windlass and Paul Chen at the time, which is Hanwei now, that kind of stuff. Eventually, you know, that as that keeps growing, I'm approaching more and more manufacturers, or sometimes they're coming to us as we started to get more exposure, picking up the brands like Deltin, Arms and Armor, Albion, and then just expanding out from there.
Now, is that still with you being in-house as well? That was prior to a warehouse when you started like contacting the manufacturers overseas and all that, and start doing your own designs a little bit?
You know, I don't remember exactly where things shifted as far as like what manufacturers and what brands I had at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I know that things got pretty quickly out of control just from an inventory perspective.
Okay.
You know, once I started importing the stuff directly,
Yeah.
it became less and less feasible to try and contain that in my bedroom.
So you would get like 50 samples.
Exactly,
and,
right. Yeah, because if you're going to start importing, you can't just order like 10 of something. It's like,
Right.
all right, well, we're going to get 100 of this sword. You know, you
Yeah.
start really having to bulk up inventory, right? So once that happens, you know, you can't stuff all that in a spare bedroom very, very efficiently.
Like, honey, we have nowhere else to put this.
Exactly.
Throw it in the back of the
Yeah,
car.
Exactly. You start building seating arrangements out of like sword crates, and just, like, taking over the entire house.
Yeah.
So you know, pretty early on, it was it wasn't too many years into it before I had to get some sort of commercial space. You
Right.
know? And I thought if I'm going to do that, then I might as well make it like into a little showroom as well.
Mhm.
So that's what I did. In the original, like first warehouse space we did have a little front showroom as well. So
Okay.
customers could come in and buy some stuff at a time. But you know, we were fairly small and unknown. So you know, some people did make the trek, and I'm sure some people watching may have been, you know, customers of ours
Right.
that far back,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even came to that original small showroom. It was in Elgin, same place that we're located now,
Mhm.
you know, but it was significantly smaller than the warehouse that we're dealing with at this point,
Right.
you know. So, but yeah, eventually that just kept growing as well, you know. So over time, as I'm picking up new lines, expanding inventory, because I've always wanted to do that. I always want, like, part of my point in starting this business in the first place was to fill my own needs, right? I wanted to have a really nice sword collection. I was really interested in this stuff, and I didn't find that was being serviced by the market that existed at the time.
So it was a huge niche that you were looking to fill
Yeah.
for yourself in the beginning,
Right.
especially from that first catalog to you being like, okay, well now I can actually, this is a big opportunity.
Yeah.
For your own needs first, and then also
Exactly.
tapering into a business.
Yeah, because I dealt with some of the companies that were around at the time. I
Mhm.
thought they were okay, but I thought they could do a lot better.
Yeah.
You know, I desired more. So it was my goal to create that experience for other people, for myself as well,
Mhm.
and start pulling in all the best swords and armor and weapons from all over the world into the one place.
Yeah.
That was the goal. And for the most part, I think we've accomplished that. I think at this point, almost all of the major brands, in swords at least, are represented here at Kult of Athena. You know, we've got a lot of things that are exclusive to us. There's a lot of brands that really don't sell to other dealers that we do carry.
Mhm.
So I think we've been pretty successful in pulling this stuff all together and trying to make it easier for customers to have access to this stuff. Because a lot of it previously you would maybe have to import directly from Europe or somewhere else.
Right.
Example is Deltin. There wasn't a lot of availability of Deltin in the US market. Medieval, or museum replicas I should say, museum replicas, they did previously carry Deltin way back, but then they shifted over to their windlass line.
Okay.
So availability of Deltin was difficult in the U.S.,
Mhm.
except for maybe some small Renaissance fair dealers and things that would have it. So we were able to kind of start pulling that in, and along with everything else, you know, it's just trying to make it easy for customers to have a very wide selection of different products at different price points. That was
Right.
always important, right? Because I didn't start, my first sword wasn't an Albion or anything, you know, it was like a $60 wall hanger, you know, something like that.
Mine was a Power Ranger sword.
Yeah, there you go.
It had AA batteries in it. And it had a shing sound when the sword drew too.
Well, you can't beat that sound. Everybody loves the sound.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's where I started. So I never wanted to cut off those types of collectors.
Right.
There's a space for that. Everybody's got to start somewhere.
Right.
Not everybody wants to drop $1,000 on their first sword.
Mhm.
You know, and not a lot of people can.
Mhm.
Right. And if you're just going to hang it in your office, you need to. You know?
Right.
Right. You buy at your level. So
Yeah.
I always tried to keep a very wide diverse line of swords at different price points, so you could find something at whatever you want to spend. You know, as little as you know, $50 or something just to hang
Right.
something nice on the wall, up to 3,500 for some really special piece. You know, wherever you fall. You know, that was the goal. I think we succeeded in that pretty well.